In part 2, we take a closer look at location-free roles and what they entail, how to build a remote team's culture, and how Merima leads remote teams, as well as what advice she has for anyone leading teams remotely. Could you tell us more about your location-free roles and what they entail?
These are the type of roles where an individual is based in one market and does the work that spans either across numerous markets or markets beyond where they're physically based. For the past 2 years, for example, I've been based in Sydney in Australia, and I'm covering a geography that spans across Africa, Middle East, and South Asia. In this role, I lead a fantastic team that is also remote and location-free. They're based in Thailand, in India, and in Egypt, and we cover work across 70 different markets. You talk about remote working and location-free roles, but I think in 2020, many roles have become remote as a result of the pandemic and just people working from home and, being in lockdowns and so on. We have started this journey as an organization a while back, but what we're finding is that most organizations still have the model where employees are physically based in a country where either their role is being performed, where their manager needs them to physically be, or where their manager is physically based. So even though they're physically not sitting in the same office, they tend to hire within that market. For some roles, this makes absolutely perfect sense. Think manufacturing, construction, face-to-face service industries. The nature of these roles is linked to a specific location. But for other roles, I firmly believe that there is flexibility, and some companies, like you mentioned, including PepsiCo, are shifting towards location-free for a number of different reasons. One could be that they would like to accommodate employees, personal circumstances where they're unable to move countries. Another reason, for example, could be that the model allows these organizations to get access to talent pools that they would not have been able to tap into previously. As you and I both know, Jeff, today's focus is kind of shifting from, let's say, capitalism to talentism. So in the search of, top talent, we really need to look broader than just our immediate surroundings. And we need to start questioning whether in the time of technology, we really need people to be based in a certain market. And this is where location-free roles really help.
How do you build a remote team's culture?
This is a little trickier than your usual face-to-face culture building, for sure. But I think one thing that the pandemic has shown us is that principles tend to be the same. So culture is all about creating those human connections and creating those norms that we just naturally gravitate to. These can be, your working habits, your team dynamics, your ways of communication. What we found is that in 2020, many teams had to build these remote cultures and often do it over MS Teams and Zoom and Skype, and just naturally gravitated towards building these virtual team cultures rather quickly and organically. There was no method to the madness. While many people didn't put much thought into it, for those that did, it typically started with having some guidelines around how you show up for calls. What's your frequency of calls? What is your working structure? And, agreeing on some of these key kind of principles and rules so that people don't burn out or they don't feel like they're always on, which is what's often happening, we're finding across the world right now. Another key element, I think, in building culture in virtual teams is trust. Trust is a key factor. You'd be familiar with this. There is a perception among some people that if you're working from home or in a remote, or you are based in a remote location, you don't need to work as hard, or that you stay at home watching TV and so on. And I can tell you now that establishing trust up front is really important. And it all depends on accountability and responsibility. In the working world, we're all adults and we all need to take responsibility for this. And I'm, a huge champion of that. And setting up parameters up front is really critical. Now, my team has been working on this for a long time. And one thing I have set up is a very simple kind of structure around our Monday Connects to understand what everyone is working on, to create a culture of transparency, to chat about how everyone is feeling and just checking in on people and seeing, what's happening in their lives, what's happening around them. And when working virtually, one thing you need to have is kind of an equivalent to that open door policy. In this case, it's kind of an open Zoom call policy, I guess. And you have a lot of different channels that you can put in place, whether it's formal or informal communication for people to be able to reach you more easily. And for our team, that is obviously email, Zoom, we have informal WhatsApp groups, MS Teams chats, and just being able to use different platforms for different things and making sure you're available for chat and a check-in whenever. Another thing that is really critical is those one-on-one sessions where investing time to talk to your team members, just check in on them and focus on, I guess, mental well-being is really, really important. And this is constantly top of mind for me. And you know, many of our team members are kind of trying to break the patterns of those, you know, Zoomed fatigue calls by having, you know, weekly check-ins wearing, you know, funny hats or a certain theme. We all wear yellow or blue. We tell personal stories about a certain item that we bring to, you know, a check-in. A book that you read that month, you know, lots and lots of different ways to connect on different levels. And communication, while it is an investment of time, it is absolutely the unlock to creating a team culture virtually.
So how does one lead remote teams? Things to keep in mind that may help people?
What I found over the past 2 years is that I need to invest a lot of time talking to people. Since I'm not there in person, I need to ensure I stay top of mind. In my line of work, you can't just bury yourself in your PC and do the work. You really need to connect to people, and relationship building is kind of, you know, a make it or break it factor. This takes time, it's an investment, but it has been the number one unlock for our team's success. There are a couple of things that have worked really well. One is really trying to understand where the teammates are coming from. What is their current reality, whether it be their personal situation, the political situation in that market, or just the number of things they have on their plate. We had a situation a couple of weeks ago with protests in one of the countries where, you know, that impacted internet connection and there were issues and so on. So you need to be in tune with what's happening on the ground. And in this instance, making space in your diaries and actively listening is really the key. Not just hovering and glossing over things, but really understanding. When working virtually, we often disconnect the person from the name in the email or, you know, the icon on Zoom, and forget that there's another human being with emotions on the other side of the world. And I think that's really, really important. Secondly, I would say structure is really important. Having weekly meetings, regular one-on-one sessions, and this is kind of your leadership one-on-one, but I find that when you're not only talking about the details and the nitty-gritty, but also tackle the strategic big rocks, make time for that headspace, you can have an impact. And ensuring that everyone's working towards a clear set of priorities, a vision, regularly reviewing this has been really important to making sure that team stays on track. Elevating yourself to 30,000 feet and kind of having that bird's eye view and making sure that people are honest to your vision, that's really important. People can often get lost when working remotely on just executing the tasks and not seeing kind of the forest from the trees. And the final point that I would call out is that in remote working, I think recognition and appreciation is really, really important. For us, celebrating success has been a really big part of the way we just do things. In normal circumstances, I think people don't often pause and celebrate the wins, regardless of how big or small they are. You know, recognizing and rewarding is so important, and often when we work virtually, we tend to forget this element. We just need to remember that we're just all human. You know, I would say to other leaders, don't assume, make sure you ask your team members, then you can mold your priorities around what's important to them, what's important to you, their priorities. Like you said, being available all the time, that's not an assumption. You should ask, you know, when can we talk? You know, when are you having dinner with your children? When are you, you know, working out in the morning? When are you starting your day today? Because we're all kind of flexible in the way we work. So we just need to be respectful of other people's time.
That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face and how did you overcome them really?
I'm glad you asked that question. Look, we often romanticize location-free roles. They can be challenging. I definitely make sure that, you know, all the cards are on the table and I let the person know what they're getting themselves into. Probably the number one thing is that these roles can get lonely because you physically don't get to see the people. And, you know, we're humans, we're made for social interaction and for connections, and there's only so much you can do virtually over Zoom. Give someone a high five, like you said, have a water cooler conversation. So I think that loneliness and the mental health is a really big focus for me and the team, as is for many, many people during this pandemic. It's an agenda item that's become very much front and center. I check in with myself, I check in with the team, because loneliness is a real thing and it can actually bog people down in terms of getting work done. The other piece is, self-motivation. I often look to hire people who are really self-driven, and motivation in location-free roles, it means that you don't get to have a pep talk with somebody every single day. You don't get to gauge how people are feeling. Often you find that drive within yourself, which I understand is not really easy for everyone, but when you get out of bed in the morning, you need to find something that you can kind of hold on to and go, okay, today, these are my deliverables, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to focus. And this takes practice, right? The third one, and something that I experience on a day-to-day basis, is time zones. It can be challenging. As an example, I find myself working Dubai hours despite being based in Sydney, and my days often end at 1 a.m. and I get some of the best focus work done actually when the kids are sleeping. The beauty of my role is that I have the full flexibility and responsibility to adjust my working hours to make sure the work is done. But I also have the personal responsibility and accountability not to work 24/7. I feel that flexibility I appreciate, but it's not for everyone. And there are people who prefer the 9-to-5 option, which, the location-free roles don't necessarily allow. Now, at the same time, flexibility can be a gift because you can schedule your life around your projects and your meetings. But in this instance, just like your role, your personal life needs to adjust and be flexible as well. So it's a give and take kind of model. So if you're a creature of habit, location-free roles may not be for you, and there are typically stakeholders in numerous locations, meetings in varying hours of the day, for example, and these are the really important things to consider when taking on a location-free role.
So we've learned from Merima that trust, active listening, structure, recognition and appreciation, respect, flexibility, and self-motivation are all vitally important and are key ingredients for teams to work successfully across locations and time zones. In the next part of this episode of Communication and Culture, we find out how Merima builds human connections and how you can communicate more effectively with your teams wherever they're located.